What's good, everybody? It's your boy Dakota. I've just done so many takes of this video. You have no idea, but I'm just here to tell you thank you so much for supporting the show. If you like what I'm doing, subscribe to the channel, leave this video a little like, leave it a little comment. If you're an audio person, leave me a little 5 stars, maybe leave me a little review. Whatever you can manage, it all means a lot and it all helps. And go ahead and check out all the links I got in the description to support both myself and whoever the guest is this week. I always try to make sure that I leave links in the description so that you can follow the fighters once the show is debuted. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Let's just get right into the busy weekend that you had, right? So you're calling one fight in Quebec the first day, the next day you're in Puerto Rico. Just tell me about that travel day, bro.
Yeah, man. So I think in total I was awake without bed sleep for about 50 hours or so. So basically, we do the show in Gatineau, which gets off the air, slightly before midnight or so. So I was able to go back to my hotel, just have something to eat, pack my bags. It was a winter storm in the Ottawa Gatineau area at that point. So I knew that it was going to be very risky to fly from Ottawa to Toronto because if any delay happened, I wouldn't have been able to get to Puerto Rico on time. And I made the correct calculation because it really started storming. So I knew that the only way to actually make this happen logistically was to hop in a car, like a car service that drove me 5 hours from Gatineau to the Toronto airport, where I then got there at about 5:45 or so, waited it out, hopped on the plane at about 9 a.m., landed in Puerto Rico, got to my hotel at about 4 o'clock, and my call time was 6 o'clock. And we had recorded a the opener, just like a prelim that I don't think actually went anywhere at 7 o'clock. So basically, I was situated in Puerto Rico about 3 hours before I started calling the next fight. And a weird thing happens, and maybe, I'm sure if you think back to times where you were kind of like overwhelmingly tired, your brain starts actually clicking in like very interesting ways. And like there were
Yeah, yeah.
times where I was like, physically, I feel very tired, but damn, the words just keep coming to me. This is magical. But I'm gonna tell, I had one of the greatest sleeps of my lifetime when I got back to Toronto.
There
So
is a weird kind of autopilot that kicks in.
there is, yeah. So I was fascinated, and shout out to Celsius Energy for keeping me alive for those shows.
Well, yeah, for everyone wondering, the hard work that it takes to put these shows on and all the people involved that are not just the fighters. I just think that that's a cool thing to tell. It's not like Corey just got to teleport, guys. So he's putting in the full court press to get there on time for you. Let's start with Rocky Hernandez for a second because when I'm watching him right now, there was one time where I thought I'm just looking at an exciting action fighter. And now I feel like I'm seeing, or I'm starting to see the best version of an exciting action fighter where like he's legitimately maybe a top 10 guy now. And I think he proved that in the shock fight, but he looks like he's even better since that fight.
I think he is legitimately a top 10 guy. I think Ring Magazine has rated, I think, number nine in the division, and I think it's justified. And I think what we saw in this fight against Iran was his ability to kind of blend that outright aggression and the power with a little bit of slickness, and also the ability to conserve his energy properly. Because remember, this is a guy that would be world champion if he had just made it out of the 12th round against Oshaki Foster. Forget making it out of the 12th round. He could have even taken a knockdown, I think, if my memory is serving me correctly. Just
He was up a couple points.
up a couple points. He could have got out of that fight and been world champion. And part of that was kind of a depleting gas tank, but realistically, that loss to Foster happened because he told his corner, "No, I want to go out on my shield. I'm unwilling to fight in any way other than the way that I imagined," and it cost him. And so I think that energy conservation has been an issue for Rocky Hernandez, and making weight has been an issue at times. That's been a very open issue of his, but so has just his ability to control his emotions within a fight.
Right.
And that really was what it was against Oshaki Foster. Is again, like, he was caught up in this story that he had told himself, kind of, no pun intended, but like this Rocky narrative of
Yeah.
I want to win in a certain way, and I'm unwilling to do it any other way. If he had done the same thing against Giron, he probably would have got himself into trouble in those final 3 rounds because Giron was really coming along. Rocky's output was depleting a little bit in the 10th and 11th round. He had a very good 12th round, I felt. But again, if you take that version of Hernandez, the one that lost against Foster, and just place him against Giron, he might not have won that fight either. But made a lot of changes in training camp. By all accounts, led a very Spartan lifestyle, locked absolutely everything out of camp. And it showed. He had an approach that I think would serve him well against a lot of top 130 pounders.
Yeah, you talk about like containing your emotions. Like you said, he wanted to finish the shock fight a certain kind of way. And in reality, all you were doing was like walking directly into like one of the best counterpunchers in the game. And he got set up, right? And seeing in this fight, seeing him be a little more technical, seeing him have a more of a diversity to what he's doing was really interesting. I didn't know if he had that layer to him. And Garon is one of those guys, it seems like when I watch him, he's kind of a spoiler. Like he didn't beat Schofield, but he didn't look Schofield didn't look great in that fight. It was a tricky fight. And so he's served as a spoiler multiple times in his career. And I thought this really is a 50-50 fight. And what it wound up being, it's one of those competitive but not close. Like every round was relatively competitive, but it easily could have been a 12-0 sweep, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And I think what it showed here is that Hernandez has a dimension that he can tap into to beat this type of fighter. Because I don't think he could fight the exact same way against an Oshaki Foster, for example, because Foster just wouldn't go, he wouldn't step to him. He's not going to chase Rocky around the ring. Hernandez isn't going to be able to kind of be switching on and off, like going on the back foot. But it does show you that he has something that could beat that type of fighter. But it's still in him is that hyper aggressive, just all out dog and pressure, power punching version of Rocky Hernandez that he could tap into against other types of fighters. So I think it's not, I don't think that this was like a change in how he would operate all the time, but it shows you that he can do something else because he
Yeah.
tried versions of this in the past and it actually got him in trouble. Like if you remember the Daniel Lugo fight, like he was in desperate trouble and like was on the verge of getting stopped by Daniel Lugo because he
Mhm.
decided going into the fight that he wanted to just be a boxer. He wanted to show that he could box, and it got him into a lot of trouble for about 5 rounds.
Which he can, but I think when he just does that, he's missing out on offense opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah. So it can't just be a one ingredient dish, so to speak, right? He
Yeah, yeah,
needs
yeah.
to get a little bit of spice in there. And I think that he found the exact recipe that would work against Iran in this fight.
You told me about this kid. I'm gonna get his name wrong. I think it's Pomperolo.
Oh, Pomerlo. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Pomerlo.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Pomerlo. You guys were talking about him. He's one of the biggest prospects in Canada. It was my first time watching him, and I was super impressed with the skill set, man. And on one hand, I could hear Rosado wanted to see him open up a little bit, which I agreed with actually. But there's another side of that to like when you see a guy and you can't shake him out of his pace. That's like what Shakur does really well. That's what like Scott Nicholson. There's fighters that you don't shake them out of their tempo, and I think that that's a real skill set. But tell me what you think of him.
I think he's a legit prospect, and it'll be very interesting because he's going to enter that WBC Grand Prix with Riyadh season, where he's just going to be facing a host of other middleweights who are 26 and under, right? So you're actually going to get to
Yeah,
see where does he rank amongst the other top middleweight prospects. But this is a dynamic that you see quite often. A lot of these Canadian prospects kind of toil in obscurity a little bit because the broader Western audience doesn't always pay attention to more local Canadian cards unless it's a show like this or a show like the ESPN Plus shows that we do with the Eye of the Tiger. You'll kind of get a look at them there. But the schooling that you get training in Quebec, and he trains with Stéphane Larouche, who of course guided Lucien Boutte for most of his career, then switched over with Jean Pascal. You get A plus work in Quebec. So this is something that you see quite often where you have these guys and you're like, who is this Canadian prospect or whatever? But he's working with elite guys in the gym and they pop out of nowhere and like, yeah, they can be the real deal. And he's just kind of the next in line with that. I think he's been a little bit held back by some weird promotional disagreements he has with his maybe still, but maybe former promoter Jan Pellerin and Group Yvon Michel. And it's kind of kept him on the shelf a little bit. But again, the work that he's been able to do in the gym has clearly kept him at a level that, again, as you saw when you watched him, you're like, okay, this could be a thing. This could be a guy who's a real deal. Very slick, but also with punching power. And we kind of dangled that Lucien Boutte type comparison out there, and Boutte might not have been quite as explicitly fluid as Derek Pomerleau, but I think it's the same type of mindset where he's counterpuncher first, but is going to counter with hard stuff. He's a counter puncher with the emphasis on the puncher, and that can make for some spectacular knockouts as we've seen from him already in his young career.
And he was pretty front foot too for a lot of the fight. It wasn't like I felt like he was on the back foot making I think
Yeah, David
McIntyre.
McIntosh, yeah.
He wasn't making him find him. You know what I mean? He was on that front foot, but he was a lot of times making the opponent take the lead, and then he was kind of countering and making him pay. I thought he had a beautiful performance, man. Another guy that's a perfect example that we'll probably touch on in a minute is Dmitri Bivol, where it's like he's a guy you can't shake out of his pace. And once he finds that rhythm, might not be your favorite thing to watch, but you're just not beating him. That's just what it is. You're just not beating him. I don't want to overstep. Obviously, it's early in his career, but yeah, I think that there's some potential for that type of a skill set.
Yeah, for sure. And again, he's going to have all the opportunities to develop properly. It's not like he has a shortage of talent around him. Like if you're in Quebec, like you think of who's in that neighborhood, so to speak, provided that the camps can get along. Like think of the 168 pounders that are just in the province. Like you have Mbili, you have Bazinian, you have
Yep.
Butler, you have Shaquille Finn. Like the work is there to cultivate really solid fighters in and around this weight class. And it's funny because it's kind of been a pattern for almost like 2 decades. Like you think of again bringing up Butte and Pascal and David Lemieux. These are all guys that are kind of in this weight neighborhood. So it's not a coincidence that as the generations have gone on, their work with the younger fighters has helped foster another good generation in this weight class. Like Canada is just pumping out good fighters between 60 and 75, and it has really, since the mid 90s.
Boy, Lucien Boutte was a fun fighter. So you had your nonstop travel day. You're in cars. You're on a bike. You're in a cab. You get to Puerto Rico. Let's talk about Subriel Matias. He's just a good time, bro. Like he is just a good time. And when I watch him, it feels like there is a certain style that is always going to give him problems. But if you don't have that style, I feel like he's just kind of fucking you up. And now he's done it again, and he's made himself the mandatory for Richardson Hitchens, which by the way I think is exactly the type of style that gives him problems. But what were your thoughts on Subriel Matias's performance?
I mean, it's so fun to watch. It's so fun to call, and there's so much. For me, that fight was a lot of fun to call, especially getting to do it, by the way, with Al Bernstein on his 45th anniversary of broadcasting, a very special fight to
Wow, I didn't
call
realize
with
that
Al,
part.
right? I mean, that's super cool. But there's just so much going on. Before I even get into, Subriel, technically, like all the things going on, the homecoming, right? You have that storyline coming back to Fajardo, this like does he still have it after losing to Paro and then getting shaken up in the first round against Roberto Ramirez? And then as the fight progresses, you have what Matias does, which is kind of test your will and test just your physical resilience. So he's breaking this guy down, but then as he's doing it, and you have Goyaz who's bleeding in a horrific cut that would have been stopped by many, many other doctors and officials,
Wild, dude.
frankly. You're very visibly watching Matias during that fight, pandering to Goyaz's corner, to the doctor, to the referee, saying like, "Hey, why aren't you stopping it?" And his body language was very explicit. Like when he came out of the fifth round, he kind of had this sort of like exasperated look, and he had sort of like a deep exhale, like I have to go do this. And it was impossible to decouple it from the reality that he was involved in a ring tragedy. And he's talked about the fact that like that sorrow has never left him. And so you have this dichotomy of Matias, this like cold-blooded, just relentless pressure fighter who, is very, very chilling when he talks to his opponents about like how he's going to break them down. But then you see him like having that doubt, like, do I want to do this? I don't really want to have to end it this way. And then there was an interaction that we didn't catch on the microphone, but my good friend Kel Dansby, who was doing some social media and works with All the Smoke and some other places, was in Matias's corner, and he heard the interaction between Matias and his trainer Nelson, and his trainer told him, "Hey, it's either him or it's you." Basically telling it, in reading between the lines, that's basically like, I know you don't want to end this, but you have to, both for your sake and also like might be better for him to just end this fight than to prolong this beating for 12 rounds. And as a commentator, like that's just a gift to have that many narratives to play with in calling this fight. Like it was beyond the action, which was spectacular as well. And Matias is such a fun fighter to watch, but having those types of emotions so present in all of these storylines, man, that's like, even with half a functioning brain being that tired, I'm like, oh, I know how to tell this story.
I had totally forgotten about that Dadashev fight, man. And now thinking back, there was that lull in those middle rounds, 5, 6, 7 before he got the stoppage. And then you could tell he had that, like, all right, one more burst. Like, let's just wrap this up. And he wrapped it up. But you could tell, I even remember him like looking at the ref or looking somewhere and he went like, and he like shrugged. You know what I mean? And it was like, what are you doing? And you could see he had like that little moment of like compassion, which is a tricky thing to have in the ring. I remember when Lomachenko was fighting Richard Comey, he kept yelling in the corner, like, what are you doing? And I think that it's very rare that we see moments like that. But like you said, there was so much context, both having the experience of the Dadashev fight and him passing after, but then Matias was making guys quit over and over. He wasn't even knocking them out. He was just making it to a level where they were like, I cannot do this anymore. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it is a wild little set of circumstances that he was working with there.
Yeah, well, and then on the other side of the fight, you have a guy in Goiás who is unwilling to quit. And in
Tough,
fact, like
tough.
that stoppage happened, he was going to get up. His corner was telling him, stay down. And, like his corner, as he was taking a knee, he was about to stand up, and his corner was telling him, like, just you have to. They were giving him permission basically to bow out of the fight, but he was willing to continue, right? Like Matias had found the guy that even in taking a thrashing from him was unwilling to quit, and someone had to pull him out. Probably should have been done a little bit sooner, and maybe by one of the other two entities that would have jurisdiction over that. But it made for a hell of a fight, man.
So Matthias is the mandatory for Hitchens now. There's parts of me that could see that looking like Haney Prograis. There's another part of me that I could see it getting a little messy for Hitchens because Matias, he's a big puncher. I've started to wonder if he's a big one punch guy or if he's like he just throws a lot of sixes and sevens and they build up and he's accurate. You know what I mean? But regardless, he hits like a motherfucker. And he does that thing that Beterbiev does where he kind of punches, he does the touch shots while he's walking forward, and then when he puts you in your place, that's when he really rips. But it is a matchup that I feel like could go either way. But how do you see that fight playing out? Do you think it'll even happen?
I do think it'll happen. I think that both of the guys are probably in a position where they're I mean, beyond the IBF, and credit to the IBF, they actually tend to enforce things like this, right? So there probably is going to be some kind of clerical pressure in making this happen. But it seems like they're the best option for one another at the moment, even if you took that element out of it. It'll be interesting, if if Hitchens can stay away from a guy who is just willing to take your shots and walk in, the piece isn't out quite yet, but I wrote kind of like a retrospective of the fight for the Ring, and in a bizarre way, I kind of compared Matias to like a good counterpuncher. What they're doing is dangling a carrot that is so tantalizing to you that you go for it. You want to take a bite out of it, and you make a mistake, and they make you pay. Matias doesn't really have any defensive mechanisms. Like the first two rounds, he'll kind of do the cross arm defense a little bit, but
It's
not doing
weird
a
because
whole lot.
I think he physically can, because you
Yeah.
saw like he got up on the balls of his feet and he was given angles, but I think like it's just not his nature.
Right. So, but what he's doing is he's like, I can take all of your punches. And when we were talking to him before the fight, we talked about, the criticisms of his defense and whatnot. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said like, I'm sure that Goyaz saw those things on tape. Like, yes, there are lapses in my defense, but if you want to capitalize on them, you're also putting yourself at risk. And that's exactly what he's doing. Like he doesn't have the defensive mechanisms that like a counterpuncher would have, but it functions in the same way that he walks in and says, "Go ahead and hit me, but if you do, I'm going to hit you about 6 times in return." So
Yes.
it functions the same way. And so basically, as long as his chin holds up, or as long as he has someone that can't like totally neutralize him, like you're gonna have to walk through some shit in order to beat Matias. And the question is like, is Hitchens mobile and long enough to stay out of those types of exchanges long enough? And it'll just be fascinating to see if he can walk that tightrope.
I think part of the issue for that style, right, is while it's working, it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have all of those that style. Every fighter with that style has a moment where it just stops working because you ran out of juice. You can't take the punishment anymore. We watched Jarrett Hurd retire this weekend. 3 years ago, Joe Joyce was about the scariest heavyweight on the planet, and it's like after the Parker fight, it's just not there anymore. And sometimes I worry with Matias, as much as he's so fun and dynamic, I do worry that there's going to be like a crap out moment if he doesn't move his head like a little more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and those are really good comparisons. Yeah, I mean, those are great stylistic comparisons to Matias, and that does happen, right? Like at a certain point, your bingo card is full, and
Yeah.
at what point? And there were real questions about that because in that Roberto Ramirez fight that led into this fight, he got seriously buzzed in the first round by a
I didn't
guy.
see that fight, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and I mean, it'll take you about 4 minutes to go back and watch it, but you'll realize when you watch it, like, oh, okay, like has his punch resistance gone? Didn't seem like it in this fight, but again, you're not only is the question like at what point will his just punch resistance just erode because he's taken too many, but also when you're taking flush shots like that, even a guy with an iron chin sometimes just gets hit right on the bingo button that knocks them out, right? And when you're wagering that every single time, just coming in face first, there and he has been like he's been dropped before, right? He's not impervious to shots, even though it might seem like it. That day could come, and frankly, in all likelihood, is going to come because it does for most of the fighters who fight the way he does.
I don't know how I missed the context of this, but it was the 45-year anniversary for Al Bernstein being live on air.
Yeah, yeah. It was the first broadcast of his 45th year of calling fights ringside. It's remarkable.
That's incredible, bro. Just give me a little insight. What's it like working with him? I know we're like probably similar in age. I grew up, with the HBO Showtime era, and Al Bernstein's kind of always been a voice of that. What's that been like for you?
It's the easiest thing in the world. It's because you don't, I feel like Al and I also kind of view fights the same way. It always seems like we're on the same page with what's going on. And he's just done this so long that he knows how to carry conversation in that particular way. And I've also known Al since like the early days of my career. He was very influential early in my career, him and Steve Farhood and others. But even before that, like you said, it's a voice that I grew up with. And it's like, even if I hadn't worked with him and didn't have that familiarity, it's like you instinctively know how to work with someone like that because it's like I've
Right.
watched you my whole life. I know kind of like the cadence that will work with you because I've spent a good chunk of the pie of my life watching fights with you calling it. So it's an honor, you know. I mean, I am extremely lucky to be a part of a significant chapter of his career.
Hey, well, listen, bro. He's one of the best of the era we grew up in, and I think you're one of the best of our current era. And it's just great to see you guys working together, man.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible to kind of have those eras cross too, which you know he did as well, right? I mean he got to work and please I'm not trying to put myself in this category, but like Al got to work with Gil Clancy and you know and like would have crossed paths with like the Don Dunphys of the world and that right, and it's cool to kind of be a part of that lineage in whatever capacity I am.
I don't know if you saw Lampley's going to call this card in Times Square.
I did, yeah. And listen, as a fan, I'm just excited to have him back, and to get to listen to. And I'm gonna to fanboy and nostalgia out. I'm sure in the way that so many people are. And you know, Jim has been incredibly gracious to me as you know as a mentor and you know maybe friend as well. I've been able to come to him, you know, with certain things that I've had questions about, and he's always been very very helpful. And I would be lying if I said that there was someone that I modeled my craft over more than Jim. You know, he is probably who I look at the most and who I revisit the most. In terms of just kind of like studying broadcast and looking for new ideas and new things that I can bring to the table. In a lot of ways, he is the blueprint that I've tried to follow throughout my career. And you know, if he wants to come back and call fights all the way up until the day that he passes, that chair belongs to him, in my opinion.
For real, bro. And when I hear him on interviews, he's like as sharp as ever. I
Yeah.
feel like he's still got the passion, he's still got the juice, you know what I mean? I'm really excited to see that, bro.
Yeah, I can't wait. And listen, like as much as I do this for a living, I'm also like beyond just a boxing fan, but I'm also a boxing broadcasting nerd. And so I
Yeah.
just want to hear these people too, man. You know, like I you know, a couple people have kind of, you know, have asked me like, "Oh, you know, what do you think about him coming back? Like, is he like taking spots?" No, man. Like
Yeah.
it's like if you know, if I'm a pro wrestling fan too, right? It's like if The Rock comes back, brother, he's gonna headline WrestleMania, and you know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna step aside. You know, like that's a I am a fan just like you, and I want to hear it. This has nothing to do with competition whatsoever.
Let's get into Tank Davis's draw with Lamont Roach this weekend at the Barclays Center in my city. Just to start off with, it was a great fight. It started a little slow, but it felt like it really heated up once they kind of got a sense of each other and what they wanted to do. I did an interview with Jordan Roach prior to the fight, and he said something really interesting to me, and I didn't know what he meant when he said it. But I was like, where's this confidence come from? Like everybody in your team was like, we got this. Like not even like, well, you know, we respect him. They were all like, nah, we got it. And I was like, where's that come from? And they were like, he said to me, he was like, Tank has mental problems in the ring. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he was like, I'm just gonna leave it at that. But if you grew up with him, you know what I'm talking about. And so I when he said that to me, I legitimately didn't know what he meant, but it stuck with me as I left the hotel that day. And then we're watching the fight, and very slowly, I start seeing what he's talking about. It's not a big. He doesn't have a meltdown. It's not like a who's the guy that fought Lennox Lewis that started crying?
Oh,
Oliver McCall.
Alder McCall, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't nothing like that. But we started to see little cracks. We started to see moments of frustration where he's kind of barking at Steve Willis, and the corner's starting to look a little more frantic, and they're wiping his face really aggressively. And then, of course, we have the knee. He's taking the knee and he's running over, and all of a sudden the rules don't apply to him for 15 seconds, and he's getting his face wiped down. There was some cracks that we started to see for me in Tank's mentality, and as Lamont, you know, who came in with this beautiful strategy and just executed it perfectly. He's on the front foot. He's taking Tank's best shots. He's coming back with beautiful counters, and he's really not avoiding any of Tank's firepower the way everyone basically has, other than Leo Santa Cruz, and it didn't work out for him. What do you make of this fight? I think the common sense, right, is that the knockdown happened and therefore Lamont Roach should have won. But even at that, the fight as it stood, I also had it 7-5 Lamont. And so the draw in and of itself was tough to swallow for me. But just give me some of your initial thoughts and reactions on a fight that, as much as I knew Lamont was going to compete, I just didn't see it playing out that way.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think my first thought was, man, I think this is the most exciting Tank fight ever. And that's not to suggest that Tank is a boring fighter. He obviously is not, but that sustained action and drama going on, and then I don't know, there's also that thing that only boxing I think can provide, where you have like a megastar like a Tank Davis, and that feeling you get in your stomach when they might lose for the first time. It's not like anything else in sports, because you see in team sports, like, teams lose all the time, right? It might be a shock if like the Chiefs lose the Super Bowl or something, but even the most dominant team, you see them lose. And when you have like a fighter like Tank Davis, who's so central to the mainstream of the sport, and is one of the biggest stars and has never lost, as the fight is progressing and you're starting to question, like, is he going to lose? Like that feeling is so special in boxing. But I agree. Like, as I was watching that, I was thinking like, hey, didn't and if I remember correctly, didn't Roach beat Tank like when they were kids in the amateurs or something? And I started thinking like, maybe that has something to do with this, right? And hearing, what you just said about talking to them, about them extracting something from knowing Tank when he was a kid. Clearly, there was a level of confidence there that, I know a lot of people scoff at that, and a lot of times those types of results don't matter. There are, Terrence Crawford lost to some weird fighters in the amateurs when he was a kid too. It doesn't mean they would go on and beat them in the pros, but yeah, this looked like someone who just didn't fear Tank whatsoever, and clearly didn't with his approach. And then a guy in Tank who, yeah, like, I like clearly was having some either like mental or emotional struggles in the ring there. And again, it's hard to decouple that from what Tank had been talking about for months prior to the fight, and talking about wanting to take a break from boxing. And I actually have found Tank's arc, so to speak, over the last couple of months really fascinating, and kind of heartbreaking or heartwarming, talking about like, hey, I want to go to therapy, but I feel like I can't because there's a coldness that I feel like I need to be a boxer. And it's like it feels like he wants to step out of this. And watching him behave in that fight, yeah, like that the tension in his corner, and that maybe like the lapse in judgment by taking a knee that ultimately didn't cost him. And again, like it felt like someone that just wasn't maybe all there in the way that he was before. And I have empathy for that in a big way. But I still think that Lamont Roach should have won the fight. Yeah, like, whether you justifiably scored at 7-5 without the knockdown anyway, or whether you thought the knockdown should have been the difference, I think that Roach should have been the winner of that fight.
So this is just something I saw this morning, but there was a fight of maybe within the last 2 years that Amanda Serrano had canceled because there was something in her hair that actually physically burned her eyes, and she
Yes,
was
yeah.
unable to fight. And it looks like something similar happened to Tank in the ring for this fight. And so I know that people are going to clown on him, but fighters are people, and if there was chemicals burning his eyes, I think that there's no doubt that that would affect your performance. It's not to make an excuse that it's not an excuse. If you're going to get your hair done, that's probably something you should be aware of that could
Sure.
happen, particularly when another star just had to cancel a fight recently. Um, but I think that the like you said, the lack of connection, the talking about retirement, the seeming like boxing to some extent is behind him. I think that's what I started to feel like. He's looking at boxing in the rear view. That's why he fights once a year. You know what I mean? That's why it's not always the fight we want to see. I don't know that that's important to him.
Yeah, well, and he actually had a really fascinating interview with Lil Yachty on his podcast, and he like looked dead in the camera and told people like, hey kids, like, don't box, go play soccer instead. Like, there really does feel some. it doesn't feel like there's some almost like resentment, like that he's like reluctantly participating in the sport, so to speak. Like he owes it to some people to maybe carry this out, or maybe like there's a certain dollar figure that he wants to get to before he can walk away,
Yeah.
whatever it is. With the hair situation, like, yeah, it could have been something that caused that. When we were watching in real time, someone pointed out like they thought that maybe his braid had kind of swung and hit him in the eye and had kind of caused like a sort of like temporary blindness. And like all those things are absolutely valid. And if Tank took a knee because of those, it still would have resulted in a knockdown. But I don't blame him for taking the knee, right? Like I don't fault Tank for that not being called a knockdown. That's a Steve Willis judgment that was the wrong call in that
Yeah.
moment. And by the way, tough month span for Steve Willis between that and then allowing that Skylar Lacey Brandon Moore fight to continue that nearly killed me when they crashed through the commentary table. So
Really?
not a good 30-day span for referee Steve Willis. Did you see that clip?
I didn't realize that they
Okay.
almost fell on top of you.
When we get off the air, or even right now, just type in Skylar Lacey, Brandon Moore. It was the
Okay.
co-feature of Clarissa Shields and Danielle Perkins in Flint on February 2nd. And whatever, go back and watch that fight. But basically, it was very obvious from early in the fight that Lacey's only plan in this fight was to hold and to try and tackle. And it was building and building and building until eventually Lacey did what clearly he was intending to do the whole time rather than box and tackle Brandon Moore through the ropes, through our commentary table, and to the floor. And then ultimately it got thrown out. So anyway, I generally think that Steve Willis like has a very good eye for fights. I think he has a good thumb on the pulse of like when fights should be stopped. But it's an unfortunate little 30-day span, I think, of judgment calls that he could have done better.
I think that's a very nice way of putting it. Um, I've wondered since this fight, just in the last couple of days, I think every fighter has a bad night, right? Like every fighter has an off night where it's just not their best. But like you said, there was so many signs or symptoms, that this could be coming. And on top of that, Lamont Roach was ready and had the fight of his life, right? But do you think, just your opinion, do you think this is a moment where Tank goes back and retools and recommits? Or is this his Broner Malignaggi moment? Where it's like, you know, this is either going down or it's going up. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
I can't quite tell where we're at with him right now.
I think that all of that has to like that is all within Tank's heart and whether this result has made him think like, no, I need a better performance to maybe go out on, or it's basically like does the and I'm not saying he should be embarrassed by this performance, but I'm going to use this term. If he feels embarrassed by that result and that motivates him to want to do better, or if that just confirms what he was clearly feeling before, like, hey, I don't really want to do this for much longer. Um, that's really the question, right? And if that I can't answer that, and only Tank can really answer like how badly does he actually want to do this anymore because he clearly doesn't have to. Tank seems financially set, and it doesn't really matter. And Tank also like one of the reasons why he's this popular is that Tank is also kind of a part of broader culture that extends way beyond boxing. There are a lot of people that watch Tank fights that don't watch any other fights. And I think that Tank could probably have enough, whether he wants to just disappear from public life entirely, which is kind of what he's talking about, or whether he wants to kind of just stay, kind of in the cultural zeitgeist a little bit as like a fashion influencer of sorts, because he seems to be one as it is. Those are all pivots that he can make too, but I don't quite know what direction he's going to go from this.
Let's show a little love to Lamont Roach for a minute.
Oh yeah,
Nobody really gave much of a chance to win this fight, and he really had a masterful performance. He came in, he was prepared, he had a real chin on him, he had a fantastic defense, he had underrated power. He clearly looked better and stronger and revitalized as a lightweight. And there was just so much to like. And of course, because Tank is such a big star, a lot of the conversation is going to be dominated by, well, what happened with Tank? How did things look from Tank's perspective? But to me, in Lamont Roach, I saw a guy who potentially could beat anybody in that weight neighborhood and is like maybe even a pound for pound type of guy. And I don't want to jump the gun, but I come from the thinking of you keep what you kill. And I thought he beat Tank Davis that night. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
to me, we have to start talking about him with a whole different kind of respect moving forward, it feels like.
We definitely do, and that includes me. I mean, Lamont Roach turned out to be way better than I thought, right? And that's not to
Yeah.
say I didn't think Lamont Roach was good, but that definitely shocked me. And the question is is will Roach prove to be in like overall better than we thought, or was this kind of like the perfect moment, perfect style matchup of a guy that he had like an otherworldly level of confidence against because of their background, or is he actually can he do that against other top 135 pounders, or if he goes back to 130? Because really, like a lot of elite fighters and mainstream kind of elite fighters have that kind of scary, dodgy decision, right? Mayweather Castillo over your right shoulder, right?
Hmm.
Or like Canelo versus Lara or whatever. Like there's a lot of like great fighters often have that night, and sometimes the guy on the other side of that fight doesn't then turn out to be like super great themselves. But we'll see. But sometimes it is the breakout performance where we found out that maybe Lamont Roach is one of those guys that we ought to talk about in that top 10, top 15 range. It certainly makes him unbelievably compelling moving forward, whether it's a Tank rematch next or against someone else. I would love to see the rematch, obviously, but I'm almost more compelled to see him now against one of these other guys to maybe get a clear determination of like, hey, was this just a great night for him, off night for Tank, or is
Totally.
Lamont Roach indeed great?
Hey, shit, if he can get a fight with Shakur next, I would love to see that. If he can't get any of these lightweights in with him, I've heard him say he'll go back down to 130. Sign me up for Roach Foster tomorrow.
Hell yeah. Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, why not? Right? Like, how about let's throw Rocky Hernandez in with him? Let's do it.
It's funny. I said that the other day, and I was like, I never thought after when I looked at the lineup of fights that I would be like, yeah, when this weekend is over, Rocky Hernandez versus Lamont Roach is going to be a fight that I want to see. But fuck it, I want to see it.
Let's fucking do it. Yeah.
So it's been a couple weeks since I've been on. If you got a couple minutes, I would love to talk about that Riyadh season card that happened
Man,
two
yeah.
weekends ago. I guess just to start, what for you was like your favorite fighter, your highlight of the weekend? I guess to open for me, it was kind of a deep cut, obviously great fights. It was 10 main events up and down.
Yeah.
But getting to watch Agit Kabayel stop Zhilei Zhang was like a really special moment to me because since I've been watching Kabayel the last couple of years, I keep saying to myself, low key, this guy might be like really dangerous and potentially one of the best heavyweights in the world. And they keep moving him up. Stops Makhmudov, stops Frank Sanchez, and then stops Zhang, vicious power puncher who also drops him and hurts him multiple times in this fight. And he just keeps pressing forward with a volume that just most of these heavyweights are not going to be able to handle. But I guess to open up, what was your highlight of the night on that card?
I mean that was definitely one of them. The highlight I think was just watching just high level brilliance in the main event, but I think that's a very easy answer. But with Kaya Bell, yeah, that's such a fascinating story because he's become kind of like the truth teller, if you will, of the heavyweight division. Like
Hmm.
time and time again, he's placed in there with a guy who's deemed to be this kind of spooky threat to the bigger names, and then Kaya Bell comes in and says that like no, like not him, not him.
Smoking
But
them.
then, at this point, don't we have to say that like the actual boogeyman is Kaya Bell himself, right? Like that,
He's the
it's
he's the
him,
three. He's got the 3 or 4 spot for me because obviously, of course, Usyk is number one. You could maybe keep Fury at 2, and then it's like Parker, Caballero, and
right?
Dubois are kind of all fighting for that 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, yeah, and he does it in such it's fun when the heavyweight division has like an array of styles too. Like you kind of have Parker, who's kind of turned into this like neutralizer spoiler, like save for the knockout of Martin Bakoli, who I basically did my trip from Gatineau to Puerto Rico, except had to fight
Yeah,
against one of the best heavyweights in the world.
yeah.
But you kind of have this like tricky veteran spoiler. Then you got Kabayel, who's like the ferocious body puncher. You've got Usyk, who's the master technician. Like it's just fun having these vastly different styles in the upper reaches of the heavyweight division. It makes for compelling conversation as well. And Kabayel also, again, like he's just got that thing in him where he's willing to step to big punchers time and time again, and that makes him really fascinating, even against a guy like Usyk. I'm not going to say that I'm picking Kabayel against Usyk, and Usyk, the fight that I'm going to compare this to, this is when Usyk was still getting his bearings against guys of this size. But you go back to like the first 7 rounds or so of Usyk Chisora, and there was a little discomfort that Usyk was undergoing, right? Where he's like, "Why is this like this is ugly? I'm getting pushed around. Like what is happening here?" Uh, a fresher version of Kabayel, I'm at least intrigued if Usyk wants that fight to see how that would shake out.
I think what's exciting about those guys too is there's been this era of heavyweights kind of since Lennox Lewis retired up to really like the Wilder Fury Joshua era where it's just these giant fucking guys who have skills, right? But they're not the most mobile, they're not the most athletic or coordinated. Fury obviously is a little bit of an exception, but there's just been a lot of big plotting heavyweights and it's a different style. And now we're seeing these maybe a little bit smaller guys, but they have really like light heavyweight middleweight type boxing ability. They're doing things on a technical level that these big power forward looking modern heavyweights they're just not doing. And I think that style is starting this batch of guys, their style has started to become overwhelming to that era of heavyweights. And to me, that's exciting because, there was, as much as I loved Vladimir Klitschko, there'd be some of those fights where he'd just be standing there with that lead hand throwing that jab over and over, like the Shagayev fight and whatever, where it's like, this is not my favorite thing to watch right now. And I feel like these guys are getting a little more fluid and they're getting a little more creative and they're kind of rising to the top right now.
Yeah, and we're generalizing here, but I think again, I think it has to do with just like the development overall in sports science, in training, and
Yep.
I think that this generation of heavyweights and the guys coming up, I mean, listen, you're always going to have just big sloppy heavyweights who are just big, and that's their calling cards. Like I'm a big guy and I do boxing training, but some of these guys, like look at like Joseph Parker's rebirth, right? I mean, and he's very like open about like his training techniques. He has like a YouTube series where you can watch most of his training sessions, and like he's training like a high level athlete. Like
Yeah.
and look at this rebirth of Joseph Parker, and it's not a coincidence that all this stuff he's doing, whoa, suddenly he's a lot more athletic and mobile, and he's winning fights because of that. And yeah, that turns this generation of upcoming heavyweights into something really interesting to tie it back into the Gatineau card, right? Alexis Barriere, the Canadian heavyweight prospect
Hmm.
who Junior Hill has taken on,
He was good.
ripped, athletic, light on his toes and whatnot. So like that's what this next generation looks like. And that's a lot of fun because people always talk about, hey, remember what those 80s heavyweights looked like? Like they were light, they could move around, they looked like athletes, they had great physiques. We might have another generation of those coming, and especially if these these purses keep looking like they are, that'll be compelling to athletes like that to try this rather than other things that they might be athletically capable of doing.
Boy, how much would you love to see Caballel and Joe Parker? I mean,
Yeah,
that's one of the best heavyweight fights. That's one of the best fights you can make, in my opinion, right now.
yeah. Oh my God, yeah, yeah. Let's sign me up. Sign me up right away.
So, what were your thoughts on the main event with Bivol and Beterbiev? Another really close fight, but to me, it felt, and I felt like Bivol edged the first one. I felt like he made it that much more convincing this time. That was how I saw it. It just felt like, particularly in that midway point where he started to find his bounce again, he just kind of separated himself a little bit. And I've seen people that thought Beterbiev won. I don't think that's crazy, but to me, it felt like he seized the momentum of their rivalry in this one. But it was
Yeah,
it was a beautiful thing to watch the whole fight.
it was a beautiful fight to watch, and like you know, I didn't make any like public predictions or anything like that. But when people ask me, hey, what do you think's going to happen in a rematch? I kept coming back to this idea that I think that Bivol had more room for both improvement and adaptation. And I think
Yep.
that is what we saw in this fight. And that's not to say that Beterbiev is like a one-note fighter or anything like that, but I felt like Bivol fought really damn well in that first fight. And another set of judges, if Bivol did that same thing, could have given him they could have given him the decision. So even if he did that same thing in the second fight, I think he would have had a potential to win that fight. Turned out that he improved, right? I thought that especially round seven onwards version of Bivol was magnificent, and he's so tough to deal with just with his footwork and his length, the way that he throws shots. That classical kind of Russian style of like the swivel and whatnot is really difficult to deal with. And I was talking about the fight. I was in the gym with Gabe Rosado the day before the Rocky Hernandez fight, and we were talking about it. We were kind of going over some of the techniques. And one thing he pointed out that I hadn't seen that was really fascinating is things really started to change for him when he started to catch Beterbiev's right hand and then be able to jab back. And the thing that Bivol does better than anyone else in the sport is punch with power while he's backing up. So
Yeah.
Beterbiev had basically completed his combination at that point with the right hand. He likes to set everything. He likes to touch with the jab, then throw the right hand, and everything comes up after that. Bivol was able to catch the right hand, counter with a jab, and then throw another three punches, and while he's at a range that Beterbiev can't catch him and can't step to him on the inside, and then he's reset the whole engagement all over. That's like, what can you do against that? And Canelo found the same problems with him. And when Beterbiev is flowing on the outside like that, that is almost impossible to deal with, frankly.
Yeah, and Bevel's defense in that was just masterful, man. Because in that first half, like you said, seven on, he really separated. But that first half, it wasn't looking great for him. He was standing his ground more, but he was definitely taking more punishment than he did the first fight. I think he was also giving more punishment, though, than he did the first fight. And so when they got to that halfway point, it's like a 40-year-old Beterbiev has taken more punches than he did the first time. And it felt like that's when Bivol put his foot on the gas and really took off. And there was even points in the fight where he was backing Beterbiev up. I didn't know if we'd ever see that in any of his fights. And Bivol was doing it. It feels like also the most underrated part of his game is his power. Because it
Mhm.
feels like, I know he doesn't have that many knockouts, but it feels like a guy like Beterbiev, you know, had another level of aggression that he could have taken it up to against other fighters. But I do think what he was taking from Bivol was bothering him.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And what's tricky about Bivol too is that power. He doesn't really have to load up on it. Again, like the way that he moves his feet and the way that he throws his hips. Again, with it like
Yeah.
that technical style, his lead hand can be extended, and just with the hip moment, like he can let something really powerful go. So you're at the end of that shot. Not a whole lot that you can do when a guy's landing something at full extension and then he has the willingness to throw a combination and then move away. Like that's just that. What do you do against that? Even someone as brilliant as Beterbiev, and again, and I want to point out, Beterbiev is a brilliant tactician. We think of him as just this brute, but there's a lot going on there, like complexity wise, with Beterbiev as well. And it was enough that it set Beterbiev back enough that he basically couldn't bully the first fighter in the way that he has his whole career.
Do you want to see a third one? I'm dying to see a third
Yeah,
one.
sure, of course. They
Yeah.
can fight 100 times, and I'll want to watch that. Like I know that like people want something new, um, because they want to kind of compare a new set of fighters and whatnot. But if you're just talking about like who could we put in the ring that will give us the best quality boxing, like that's about as good as you're gonna get. Like, of course, I'd love to
Right.
see against Benavidez and whoever else. That's all great, but I'm not complaining if you keep feeding me better BF go for it. My mouth is wide open, brother.
Well, and people say, we don't get trilogies anymore. Well, you have to
Yeah,
have the attention span for a trilogy. You know
yes.
what I mean? Which I think the internet era is sort of running out of.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm like, chill out and like if they want to give us the trilogy, I want to see it.
That being said, Bivol and Benavidez is one of the most exciting fights I can think of at the moment. And as great as Benavidez is, and he was really incredible against Morel, it's hard at the moment for me to see anybody over the course of 12 rounds getting the better of Dmitri Bivol right now. It's just tough for me to envision.
Yeah, and likewise with Benavidez, like it's tough for me to envision someone for 12 rounds evading Benavidez with that hand speed and with the size and whatnot. Like that matchup to me, it's not only just an interesting clash of styles, but to me, it's a fascinating clash of gifts that both men have. Like Bivol, again, with that style and the mobility and his intelligence, and then Benavidez just with that otherworldly combination of size and hand speed. That'll just be just a beautiful fight to watch.
Last one on that card, I wanted to ask you about Virgil Ortiz getting a close decision over Israel Madrimov. Hell of a fight. Madrimov came off at the beginning, and he was kind of trying to make it a stinker. He was moving a lot. He was making himself very elusive. But Virgil did something that I talk about with that certain fighters do. He does it. Keyshawn Davis did it against Baranchik, where you capitalize on little moments. A guy's not giving you a lot, but when you get that little moment, you take advantage of it and you do damage. And then it's like by the seventh, eighth round, Madrimov is starting to look a little desperate, and Ortiz is, getting that downhill momentum. Virgil's a really special fighter, man, and it feels like this crop of 154 guys in the last few years, there's a lot of turnover because there's so much talent. So it's like, Hurd's the titleist, then he loses to J Rock, who loses to Rizar. It just there's a lot of turnover, but it feels to me, especially with Terrence Crawford leaving, it looks like that Virgil's the guy at 154 right now.
Yeah, and it's funny because I kind of that was the thing that I noticed with Virgil too is kind of stealing those moments, and there are sometimes they don't present as like notable moments with Virgil, but I think you're probably seeing the same thing. It's like if he gets to the inside, there's not a whole lot happening. He'll rip a hard right hand in the body, right? And in the moment, it looks like oh, it's like Ortiz getting frustrated because he can't land his clean shots. No, that's very intentional. He's
Yeah.
wearing you down. He's like, well, if I'm going to be this close and I get to hit you somewhere, I'm going to, because there aren't a whole lot of people pound for pound in this sport that hit harder than me, so I'm going to hit something.
Yeah.
And right, like it took Madrimov's ability to make it a stinker, as you described, took that away by the midway point of the fight, and it was, yeah, it was a great because I think there were some real questions about Virgil after the Boachuk fight. Like, oh, is he as good as we thought? Yeah, yeah, he definitely is. And sometimes you get a guy like Boachuk in front of you who can just take your shots and keep plowing forward, and like that'll make people ask questions about you. But clearly, Ortiz still has it in a way that we all thought he did.
Well, and Virgil's taking killers, bro. I mean, after years of like me asking Tank Davis to take the fights that I want to take and then him not taking them, it's refreshing to see a guy like Virgil just kind of going out of his way to take killers that aren't like the biggest names.
Yeah, well, and this is a guy who, his body shut down on him, and he had, the better part of 3 years of his career just taken away. And so I think a lot of it is making up for lost time, but maybe that thing in the back of his mind, like, I don't know how much time I realistically have left. Not to say that his career's, but like, he's been through a situation
Right.
where
It's not
looked
eternal.
like his career, right? There's that acknowledgement that this isn't forever. So I can't be planning too far down the road. I have to take these big fights now. And that's also his attitude in the ring. Like I'm not gonna wait. I'm coming at you. I
Right.
have this power, and I want you to feel it.
Right. We don't got time to play with. I think that's a
Right.
that's a great way of putting it. Um, well, damn, Corey, this has been one hell of a show, bro. It's always a pleasure to chop it up with you, man. When are we gonna get to see you on the air next?
Good question. Okay, so what do I have? I might. So the only thing I know well, I know a lot of things for sure. The next time you'll definitely see me. I'm doing the Kenshiro fight, March
Oh shit.
13th. Yeah, so I'm doing Kenshiro on the 13th. It'll be on if you get the Sky Sports feed or yeah, if you get the international feed on that one, you can catch me on there. So that's gonna be a hell of a fight to call. I
Are you
cannot wait.
going to Japan for that?
No, I don't know. Am I supposed to like? We're gonna be in a studio, whatever. The magic of television. I'm not gonna like lie to you and say that I'm in Tokyo. I don't know if we. So back in the day, I'm going on the tangent here. There was a time in like in boxing commentary where they would actually want you to lie about that. Like I remember doing like
Mm.
fights where there'd be like a green screen of like the mountains of Mexico behind me. At this point now, for like Sky Sports and whatnot, like we admit that we're in our home
Yeah.
studio or somewhere else. So yeah, we'll be in a studio for that one. But man, that's gonna be a banger of a card and a banger of a main event. So you can catch me on there. And then Overtime Boxing comes back on October 22nd. We'll be back in San Diego for that one. Malik Montgomery will be in the main event, so he's always a lot of fun.
Are you on the Butler Bazinian joint?
That is no longer happening because Bazinian suffered a ankle injury, so that will
Damn.
be rescheduled. So unfortunately, so I was yes, the answer was going to be yes, but that'll be pushed back down the road just a little bit.
Well, make sure you check Corey out this weekend. Like I said the last time we did the show, bro, I really enjoy your work. I enjoy the respect and the knowledge that you bring to the game that, I don't necessarily feel like is always there in commentary, but I know that when you're on the mic, we're going to get our fair share of that. And it's always refreshing. So I appreciate you, bro.
I appreciate you as well, and I could say the same thing about you. Just the ability to come on here and nerd out about boxing. I wish I could do more of that. So anytime you want me on here, let's do it.
Well, I love hearing that, bro. We'll talk soon. All right. Thank you for coming on.
Anytime, man.